You're sort of in love with the person, yes, and the body, yes, but also this like whole fantasy about completion and belonging and safety. And then as we spend time with people that we fall for, they become, the fantasy, so like some cracks show up in the fantasy and you start to see them as a little bit more, like the projection disperses, the fantasy disperses a little bit, and you see their humanness.
Mm-hmm.
And then it transitions into like human closeness or human intimacy, which for lots of us is really hard to tolerate, actually. It's easier to relate with a fantasy.
Coming all the way from Minneapolis to Washington, D.C., we now bring you Enter the Freud.
Warning, this podcast is for entertainment only, not intended for medical purposes. Listen at your own risk.
Rihanna and Chris Brown.
Okay.
And it was Chris Brown talking. And Chris Brown, like there was this in the news, I don't know however many years ago, like that there was like he got like arrested for punching her or something. I don't know, do you remember that?
I don't remember this news item.
And it was like it was kind of around like the Grammys and Rihanna was like the celebrated artist at the time. And then like a week later, like Chris Brown gets arrested for punching her. And so just the story was just like, what a asshole, toxic, horrible man he is that he would like punch her and she had to go to the hospital. And then I don't know, much later they were coming out and talking about their relationship. But anyways, I was listening to him tell the story. And as he was telling the story, I started to, part of that is like we Americans, we love like the celebrity gossip and the celebrity relationships thing. And that's probably why I started listening to it. But as he was telling it, was like the Chris Brown, Rihanna celebrity thing faded. And I started just to hear a human telling like an extremely common human story. And it was like, oh, Chris Brown and Rihanna, they're just average humans like the rest of us. And I've heard this story so many times from patients and from friends, and I've lived the same story. And it's like, and so the story he was telling was that like when he and Rihanna met, they just like fell wildly, insanely, passionately in love, and they were like inseparable, and they just were like, I don't remember what it was, and I'll make up the archetypal story, and that they just like would go and take a vacation to the Riviera and like be in a hotel and just like make love sexually and make love emotionally and psychologically nonstop 24/7. It's like that story, and it's so much fun to hear that story, and it's such a human experience. And then, fast forward however long, and then their fights, and he would say they would just fight, and that they would both get so violently angry at each other, and that they would both get physically violent with each other. And he's like, and it's not okay for a man to hit a woman, and I feel like such a fucking horrible person for doing that, but I just get sucked into this like emotional, irrational, passionate place where I lose my mind, and I'm just like possessed by anger, and I do stupid, shameful, unforgivable things. And as he was saying this person who, when I first heard the news, I, like everyone else, thought, oh, what a fucking horrible, dumbass person. He should go to jail. Mm-hmm. And when he was saying that, I was like, totally felt compassion and even empathy for him. And I'm like, oh, I know that feeling. Which with that, I guess if I'm having two different thoughts. The one thought is that how we just sort of pigeonhole or scapegoat or whatever these celebrities and turn them into just like horrible people. When you actually hear the human story behind it, it's a different story. But the main thought that I'm getting at is that story of intense bliss eros is, well, first off, let's just start with that. That story of intense bliss eros is the greatest, that space that a human can get in. That's like the best space that a human can possibly be in.
That's wonderful.
And we could almost just talk about that, but I've sort of ruined the punchline or something in that. But that seems to set up the like exile from Eden eventually. Like that's Eden, and if you get in Eden, eventually God's gonna boot you out of Eden, and when you're booted out of Eden, the fall is fucking painful.
Yeah.
And so then I guess the way to start moving this conversation is to sort of pose to you as a therapist and a couples therapist of like, I think a lot of people, most people, I hope everyone's experienced that state because it's the fucking greatest thing ever. And then I think a lot of people think that that's how a relationship should be and it should stay like that, right? And I don't know if I'm wise and mature and rational or whether I'm like jaded and beat down. But like, I don't believe that's a sustainable thing anymore. And so just let me hear your thoughts on that state and the sustainability of it and sort of the big questions about that.
That's a fun question. So, yeah, I guess I think about, a word we could use for that initial wonderful, intoxicating bliss is limerence, right? Which is this word given to the initial flow of hormonal intoxication. Oh, it's wonderful. It's riveting, right? And who knows how long it lasts. It's like for some people, it might just be like this first 6 weeks or the first 3 months. And if you're lucky, you get 18 months or something of limerence. And part of the way I see it is that in some ways, it's like you've fallen in love with a fantasy, like a fantasy that's in you. Like you've found someone who's close enough that you can project the fantasy onto them. And you're close enough. There's some of these key places where you line up and they can project a fantasy onto you. And so you're sort of in love with the person, yes, and the body, yes, but also this like whole fantasy about completion and belonging and safety and this so there's a fantasy element there. Yeah. And then as we spend time with people that we fall for, they become, the fantasy, so like some cracks show up in the fantasy and you start to see them as a little bit more, like the projection disperses, the fantasy disperses a little bit and you see their humanness. And then it transitions into like human closeness or human intimacy, which for lots of us is really hard to tolerate, actually. It's easier to relate with a fantasy, like the song you hear, the romantic like love song that you hear, or the Hollywood romance. It's like we want to project into that. But the actual human contours of intimacy are messier and there's not as many like soaring moments, right? And you start to feel your partner's limitations. You start to feel your own limitations. They start to see you, aspects of you you'd rather not show. You start to see aspects of them they'd rather not show. And that's the real like blood and sweat of human intimacy. Yeah. And I think it's really beautiful in a different way. It's not beautiful in the glossy fantasy way. It's beautiful in the like, oh, this is the grit of loving another human and me showing you the way I'm messy and you showing me the way you're messy. Yeah. But I think this thing you're talking about, maybe for these two, the rage that came out is like, maybe that was the moment where they actually started to encounter each other as full humans, beautiful and also limited and flawed, and then whatever kinks in their attachment system are there around like actually encountering another human start to surface. Yeah. And for those two, maybe there's like tremendous rage. And for lots of people, for some people there might be tremendous fear. Like, oh no, now I've got to run away or hide myself or, who knows what comes out. But yeah, so that's how I don't know. Does that resonate? Is that how you make sense of it
totally.
Too?
But okay, so that what you're just saying, which I see it the same way, leads to this perspective. And I think a lot of good therapists, therapists who've done a lot of this work themselves and have done a lot of work for people, come to this perspective, which I think was implicit in what you're saying, but I just have mixed feelings about it, is that like emotional maturity or relational maturity, or like if humans evolve and get to a more mature place, what they do is they realize that this fantasy, this kind of youthful fantasy, is unsustainable and is kind of delusional, or it's youthful and it's immature. And so let's say it's you and me, and so I fall in love with you and I like think you're the most amazing unicorn in the universe and it's so great, and so I just want to like make love to you in every which way 24/7, right? And this perspective is that I'm not really even seeing you, I'm actually seeing my fantasy that I project on you, and that eventually with time that projection, that like illusion that I've cloaked you in will slowly decay, and then I'll see the real you, and then I'll be fucking pissed at you because you're not the unicorn I thought you were, and then we fight and whatever. Okay, and so then this therapeutic wisdom maturity perspective is that David needs to learn to accept that the woman he falls in love with is just a human being, and she has good parts and bad parts, and you did a good job describing this different type of love. It's like the mature love. And that love is like two real humans see each other for good and for bad, and they accept each other for good and for bad, and they stay committed for good and for bad. And then there's a partnership, and there's stability. And then both of us, since I can see your imperfect parts and I still love you, you feel more truly seen in love. Absolutely. And then vice versa. And that's kind of like a healing thing for both of us. And so we kind of grow and get healthier. Okay, so I think a lot of like more seasoned, wise therapists kind of have this perspective. But what's implicit in that is that kind of love is like better. And the Chris Brown, Rihanna kind of love is immature and volatile. And they're riding the roller coaster, and the highs are fucking high, but the lows are low. And us mature therapists, we don't get on that roller coaster. Right. We do this much more stable, long-lasting, secure thing where we see, and like I believe that, but on the other hand, I'm wondering, like, I don't know, is it that simple? And like, is the like pinnacle of wisdom, I'm just gonna say it in this kind of funny and slightly dark irony ways, like, is the pinnacle of wisdom to be in a relationship where you don't really have those fucking ecstatic,
where there's not much excitement?
Right.
Yeah. Right, is that somehow developmentally more advanced?
Well, that's the implication.
Well, here's the thing I'm wondering, is that I do think that the way that maturity comes into play here is that in this initial limerence, let's say, like, you made it sound like it didn't have anything to do with me. It was just like it was complete projection. It was from within your imagination, and you projected that onto me. And I think I'm wondering if that's a more immature way that limerence happens. In other words, could it be that you actually do sense something about me? You're sensing something about my essence, about the way I talk or move through the world, or what I care about, or how I show up in my relationships. So there is like, my essence is in there, but then you're inflating it with your fantasy. Yep. And I do think that with maturity, people actually learn to sense into the other human. Yeah. And feel like there's my subjectivity and there's your subjectivity. I know you're different than me, so even though I've got like sort of my, lavender colored shades, and I'm seeing you as more beautiful than perhaps you are, I am still seeing you. Mm-hmm. And that comes with maturity, is the ability to see another human as separate, and so that you're not just a projection of my fantasy. You're also you with my projection on top. And then maybe, I don't think I answered your question exactly, if it's more advanced, but I do think that that's how maturity plays a role in here.
I mean, I totally agree with that. Okay, so let me get back to Will Smith and Jada Pinkett, because there may be a good example of this. Now, and so they like released this interview where they talked about their marriage and their open marriage and stuff like that. And when I watched the interview, I had this sense that, you know, they're older now. I think they have been together a long time, and they met when they were young, and they're older now. And I had the sense that they're pretty mature, and they sort of had done what I'm talking about, is like worked through stuff, and they'd both done a lot of therapy, and they both seemed much more mature. And I agree, I like what you just said, and agree with what you said, is as you get mature, you actually can see the true other person, and you can fall in love with that, and that can become intoxicating. But then that also fades.
I don't know if it always does.
Well, that's the question. It's
I think in most maybe.
In my view of Will Smith and Jada Pinkett, it has faded. At least, who knows? I can't tell. But when I was watching the interview, I was like, it was a cool story, and they were being really. I loved it was like mature and wise what they're doing, but I was also like, but they're not in love, and they don't have passion for each other, and they
feel that,
and they don't want to go fly to the Riviera and make love for 24/7.
How could you feel that in watching them?
I could be wrong, but yeah, my sense was that they're together. My guess is that they're together as a loving in the way that like family members love, not in the way that lovers love. That they're together as a loving couple, and that they're committed and they love each other in the way family members love each other, but that they don't have this new lover, romance, joy, erotic excitement.
Spicy,
let's go to the
fantastical
Riviera together and do it. There's not that many people except for new lovers who are like, let's go stay in a hotel and not leave the hotel for 4 days. Like the only people who want to do that are new lovers. And it's kind of a delusional state. You know?
It is intoxicating.
And it's the best, I think it's the best state humans can be in.
Yeah.
But the only people who want to go into a hotel and not leave for 4 days are new lovers.
Is that true? Or like addicted video gamers.
Oh no!
Video gamers.
Yes.
Sorry.
God, that's so horrible. That's totally true. And then we could add other people who are like drug addicts. A heroin addict could probably go into a hotel room with some heroin for 4 days.
Yeah.
Right?
For 4 days and go into a trance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Video gamers.
Oh,
that's fucking totally true.
But it's true. Yeah.
But in terms of a relationship, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you've been in a relationship with a guy for a long time, you've been in a relationship for several years, like you don't want to go into a hotel room and stay in the hotel room with just him for 4 days. You'd rather go out and go walk around.
And get some other stimulation elsewhere. Right. Yeah. That you might choose to express with your partner. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm only drawing on my clients and my own personal experiences, but I guess I do think that limerence is a temporary. Mm-hmm. It is temporary.
That's my sense.
And maybe that's actually part of what makes it transcendent, in the way that like you're cherishing it when it's there, knowing that, I guess the first time you have it, you don't know that it's probably going to disperse or settle a little bit.
No, you're in a delusional state and you think that it'll last forever.
And then you're devastated when you realize that starts to wane a bit.
And you start to fight the other person because you don't want it to slip through your fingers. And so there starts to be like, no!
You can't become yourself. You can't become your actual embodied self. I need you to stay as this idealized self. Yeah. But what if it's temporary and that's part of its beauty, like that, in the same way that like you can be more, if you're actually at peace with the fact that you're gonna die, you can be awake through your life. It feels similar to that. And there's a little bit of this where it's like, you know, I mentioned video gaming or heroin, like and both of those have a kind of like grasping for pleasure too, right? And I do think that that culturally, perhaps we do grasp for limerence, or we grasp for that, like for dopamine. The pleasure, the dopamine hit of new love, you know, and I guess you'd almost have to, would you have to shift from one person to the next, maybe to get to keep that drug flowing, the limerence flowing.
And for sure people do that.
And
that's love addiction.
Right.
It's like, ooh, I gotta find the next person that I can like go into project that dopamine intoxication. Okay, so that seems like obviously an immature, not great way to live, is like always looking for the next dopamine fix from the next person and cycling through people. Especially if we're cycling through people on a weekly basis, that sounds bad. But what our culture says is the proper way to do it is just to have the dopamine intoxication once.
Yeah.
When you're 24, you have it for a year or 6 months or maybe 2 fucking years if you're lucky, and then it goes away, and then you don't ever get it again for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound that great either.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually really liked the way you described it. I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective, and that is kind of beautiful. And I also feel like there's been a lot of really fucking great art and poetry and music that I kind of was hearing as you were saying that is like the one true love in my life, and all the like poems and music and whatever that like are written about that one true love.
The transcendent love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
But I also think this is a really interesting moment culturally to be talking about this question, because I think, there's, for the last 20 or 30 years, there's been way more questioning of monogamy or like long-term commitment. And people are, I think the queer community caught on to this long before the straight community, but like people are experimenting and finding other ways to keep Eros kind of alive or flowing in their relationship, even if they have whether they have a primary partner or not. So it's a really cool time to think about this, and it's not so. There's much more fluidity in all realms of sexual culture right now. Gender expression for sure, but also relationship structure and monogamy, non-monogamy. So it's a great time to be asking that question.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing as you're saying that your sense is that that's historically what we're in is exploring, asking questions, exploring new territory rather than having it figured out.
I don't think it's all, it doesn't feel figured out. It feels very much at play. And I think there's certain at least in the United States, there's certain sort of like, kind of like, what would be the word? Like certain segments of the population that are willing to be experimental in this way, and other segments of the population that aren't, so it's not, and no judgment either way, but it's like, I do think there's sort of a movement towards, more openness, more questioning, more fluidity, less faith in the heteronormative institution of marriage overall for heterosexual people and not for heterosexual people,
There's this perspective I've heard a lot recently. This guy wrote this book. It's kind of, I don't know what I think about it, but it's an interesting idea. And I don't know if this is the title of the book, but this is the kind of the key idea, is luxury beliefs. If you Google search luxury beliefs, you'll find this guy. Okay. He's a super young guy, and he's kind of a cool, new, interesting perspective. And the general idea is that more economically, like rich, privileged, college-educated people have these various beliefs that seem really cool, but that they actually don't work that well for a lot of people, and especially people who don't have the economic educational privilege. And non-monogamy is one of the main ones he talks about.
Yes.
And I don't remember it too well. I haven't read the book. I've read a little and I've heard him speak. But here's my attempt to super simplify the idea: is that non-monogamy or open relationships purport to like allow more flexibility or exploring new territory or allow new possibilities. And actually, I think personally I'm on board with that. But this other side critique is that, but it has really bad effects in terms of family stability and in terms of what kids actually grow up with. And that for household family stability, this whole idea of open relationship, non-monogamy thing is actually disastrous. And he has some critique of these like economically privileged, educationally privileged people that are sort of talking about this thing. And then there's this interesting contrast in that actually those, like if you look at the stats of marriage and long-term stable relationships and income, richer people get married way more and are way more monogamous and stay married way more.
Wow.
And lower income people way less. And he's like, but it's the richer people that are talking about this non-monogamy. It's just an interesting criticism he makes of the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I have two thoughts about it. One is like that, I guess I would like to read his argument, but if I'm gleaning it from what you're saying, like maybe we could think of this as sort of on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like that if you've got your sort of survival needs met and your relationship needs, and then this is like sort of for people that you'd have to already have a relatively comfortable life, maybe, right? To be able to think like, you know, I have a partner where we don't have to hustle for our survival needs. Yeah. What else do I need to feel actualized, to like feel like my life is rewarding? Yeah. And so I can see it in that way, but I just don't think that, okay, so having said that, I do think that at least within like sort of the polyamory world, that what I've read, the data shows that it is actually, polyamory is more common in like white, upper middle class, college educated people. And you could argue that that's like because maybe they have time and consciousness, psychological availability, right? Not having other stressors to be able to like actually look for fulfillment in multiple relationships. So that I think is a valid, that's a valid point.
Totally. I think Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very relevant thing. And then, as it goes up, it gets to these, and so it does seem like higher up is this like exploring my sexual, you know, all the subtle little sexual play stuff I want to do feels like really high up. Like that's a luxury. A lot of people don't have the luxury to be like, oh, tonight I'd like to wear a Peter Pan costume.
Right, yeah.
Like I haven't gotten to wear the Peter Pan costume yet and I don't feel fulfilled
and I need to express that part of my identity tonight.
Right, that's a fucking luxury.
Yeah. But then how do we explain the fact that, I mean, I don't know about you, but many of my clients who are in their 20s are choosing or falling into open relationship structures, and they may or may not have economic security, relational security.
Totally.
So there's also a thing happening in the younger generation that is not about, you know,
and I think
that's not the same demographic.
And I think this guy would argue, and that's not good for our culture, particularly for that I think I might not be making his argument well, but that it's like there's like a loosening and dissolve. There's like the old structure of marriage and monogamy that had like a solidifying effect on our culture to like keep families together, and there was economic security there, and there was like familial security to raise the kids in that, and that was good for the kids. I think that's the argument. And that the effect of this non-monogamous luxury belief is it's loosening and dissolving that, and that the rich and privileged, that's okay because somehow they still end up doing that. Whereas the not rich and not privileged, there is this dissolving, dissolute impact, and it's actually worsening. And then there's this argument, look, historically, that like 60 years ago, the institution of marriage was much more solid on all levels. But that as this dissolving impact has happened kind of after the 60s, it's like the lower income people who've suffered more. And especially the lower income kids who were brought up without fathers, primarily.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it definitely can sniff out a sort of conservative or reactionary thread to that argument, because if really what and I don't know if this is what he intends, but if really his intention is to protect children's well-being, then monogamous heteronormative marriage has not been particularly good for children either, you know, because kids get exposed to domestic violence, they get exposed to substance abuse, they get exposed to
miserable fucking parents.
Miserable parents who are unhappy with each other, And so I don't know that it's worth trying to maintain that for the sake of...
Totally.
I just think there's a lot of other ways that children can learn about, and I think if the adults around them are healthy and emotionally healthy, then they have the best chance of growing up to be emotionally healthy. So I'd much rather have a child grow up in an open marriage where the parents actually are communicating well and loving each other, rather than a monogamous marriage in which the dad is beating the mom.
Totally.
Like, it just seems like no competition.
Medicating with himself with alcohol because he hates his wife, so he has to be drunk all day.
So this idea that we're going to go back to the good old times of marriage, I think, is false. Yeah. I just don't think that's. I just don't think that's real. I am interested in this thing of okay, anyway, you're going to change gears.
No, finish that thought.
The thing of that working class or lower middle class people are impacted more negatively by open relationship structures than middle or upper class families. That is really new to me, and I can't understand what the structure is of that argument.
I don't totally understand it, but I think it seems like this guy has done his research, so he has a good argument, and I think it's more like the dissolution. If we go back in time 100 years or something, I don't really know. You're supposed to get married and you're supposed to stay with that person and you're supposed to raise the kids together. Yeah. That was a really clear, strong value 100 years ago. Yeah. And starting kind of in the 60s, slowly but surely, that value has weakened and dissolved. Mm-hmm. And I think the argument is that, and then I think you could look at the statistics of how many kids grow up in a household where mom and dad are present on a daily basis, and how many if we go back to the 50s, how many dads are out making money, bringing it home to support the family, and then how the statistics have changed over the decades, and then the argument is that as the marriage value has dissolved, so has this nuclear family, and that the effects of that in terms of poverty or single parent households, that all those things seem to correlate. Is my guess, is the argument of some of that, which I don't, it feels like maybe correlation, not causation in my mind, but it is a interesting idea to.
I also wonder if he's not saying it explicitly, but trying to talk about race, and that makes me uncomfortable. I don't know, that makes me want to dig deeper and hold the question open wider. Because even this thing you said about the man going off to make money and come home to the children, that is a kind of there's a whitewashed history there of that. Even in the 50s, that only represented a certain demographic of families,
and it
right?
seems like that's more like the white family.
I think that's an upper middle class white family, or at least that's that was the norm that was established for.
Right, and you think of Leave It to Beaver, and there is that portrayal of the white family. But, and again, I should have done my research before trying to talk about this. But
I'd like to watch this. Hear this guy's argument.
But there's this. I remember watching some documentary about one really important historical turning point that Black Americans suffered horribly from, and I don't remember, but it was something about that. Back in the 40s, something about the migration up north, that there was a lot of Black men well employed at factories in the 40s. And so that there was a growing, healthy middle class of Black American families. And I don't know this, but let's speculate. And that they were kind of following more this norm, this Leave It to Beaver norm. And then I think something historically happened about more economically in terms of industry and factory jobs and whatever, but that really fucked Black men over in terms of employment. Okay. And actually, as I'm thinking aloud, it could be that would be more the cause of the degradation of the nuclear family, as opposed to this idea that you don't need to be married. Yeah. But I have heard some, I can think of a couple names, black academics talk about black values and monogamy and family values versus non-monogamy and I don't need to raise my kids, and that they've criticized the black American values for shifting from no, you got to be married to the woman and raise the kids to no, it's okay to not. So there's that conversation in the black community happening too.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like what we're approaching is that there's so many social movements that have sort of layered on top of each other to get us to this moment of openness and fluidity in relationships, including the civil rights movement, including the feminist movement, including even the sexual revolution, right, in the 60s. So here it's like, and then I don't know what else either, but yeah, there's obviously, it's hard, it may be hard to attribute it to one.
Yeah, for sure.
And this guy wants to attribute it to like non-monogamy somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels like a bigger swirl, a bigger cultural swirl than that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, but this was the question I was going to ask a minute ago.
Yeah, you're on another.
But so, what do you think of? I can just sort of picture clients I've worked with or friends I have where they're in a long-term monogamous relationship, and it's kind of like, all right, the excitement is gone, but what culture says I'm supposed to do is just keep plodding along, and we get along good enough, but versus, I can like get on a dating app and start flirting with, it's like opening this door, right? It's like let's keep the door closed and keep my marriage really solid versus let's open the door of Tinder and usher in like God only fucking knows what. Mm-hmm. And there's a destabilizing, it feels like there's a super high percentage chance that when you open the Tinder, when that guy I'm talking about opens the Tinder door, it's going to be destabilizing.
To his primary relationship.
Right. And thus to the structure of his whole life. Yeah. And then potentially to the structure of his children's life.
Yeah, I can see that. Although it seems really dependent on, I guess, the intention. Like, why is the guy opening Tinder? Is he opening Tinder because he's dissatisfied with his wife or bored with his wife and trying to source some erotic energy somewhere else that he's then going to bring home to his wife to try to like have a dynamic relationship? Is he open with her about what he's looking for? What is he looking for? Even psychologically, I'm really curious about that. What is he looking for there that he doesn't have at home? How does that relate to his sort of like psychological structure? And also, just like what's the intention there? Is he talking to his wife about what he's feeling? Is she also opening Tinder? Or is maybe he's gay and his husband is opening Tinder and they've decided that that's like they both want to give each other permission. There's so many permutations of this, and I think it does come down to intention. And my bias, I think as a therapist, but also just as an individual, is in the direction of openness around this, as opposed to the like, don't ask, don't tell, just go get your get off however you get off and then come home and don't ask, don't tell, which is a more European model, actually. I think more European couples operate that way, and it seems to work well in Europe. I think I lean a little bit more towards transparency and open communication around if people are going to decide
and
open their marriage.
Right, use the word, it gets back to the intention. And see if you can kind of simplify and describe what the bad intention category is versus what the good intention category is.
Right. Can I do that? What is the bad intention? Well, certainly there can be an escapist tendency there. It's like, okay, you're my primary relationship. I'm struggling with you, but I'm feeling conflict avoidant around it. So instead of doing the like relational work with you that ultimately would help me evolve as a being and help you evolve as a being, I'm kind of going to do a more avoidant thing and like whatever. I'm just gonna like press pause on our relationship and go get a like dopamine fix somewhere else. And that seems to me, I don't know that that's negative. I just think that it's, if the person is actually engaged in a process of evolution or waking up, which not everybody is. I mean, if you're just looking for pleasure, that's an okay strategy. But if you're trying to live the sort of like this, the observed life or the awake life, that feels to me like overly avoidant. Yep. I'm just trying to get away from my discomfort in one relationship by pulling in another relationship. Now I've got the complications with this relationship and the complications with this relationship. And I'm actually feeling, I'm like actually overextended emotionally. Yep. And I obviously have like some avoidant tendency here because I didn't want to do it with you. And so then when it gets complicated over here, I could maybe ride the limerence for a few months, but then it's going to get complicated because human relationships are complicated in a way that can be really heart opening, but can also be really maddening. So that, I think if that were my client, you know, who was like doing this avoidant thing and just trying to get some relief in an escapist way, I would just want to ask them questions about what's your intention? No, are you trying to get away from the hard work?
I think that's a good, I think you're onto something there. Okay, well, so now the other question. Now see if you can describe the good intention.
The good intention behind opening so non-monogamy. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can capture all I don't want to be the spokeswoman for that, but like, it's almost like we should listen to multiple voices on that. But
well, yeah, you share first. I think I probably could answer the question too.
What's the like positive reason for non-monogamy?
Yeah. Well, I think what you just did a good job describing is a very common, dubious, not healthy, escapist, avoidant, immature thing. Yeah.
But very understandable and very human. Right. I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to approach the discomfort with you. Yep. So I'm going to look elsewhere for, for relief. Yep. So, okay, let's see. What is the more
like mature and constructive and wise and.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I'll put some words to it and then you put some words to it. But I would say it's something like, that. Okay, let's say, again, you and I are in a primary relationship, that there's a certain kind of wholeness or stability here. And you don't meet all my needs, but no intimate partner can meet all my needs. And I haven't hired you to meet my needs. I've hired you to be my companion. Not hired you, but I've partnered with you to be my companion. Okay. And so there's a certain wholeness or okayness here. And then maybe we're up on the top of Maslow's triangle again here, but there's some sense of like, there's other strands of there's other aspects of my identity or other archetypes in my being, like if in a more Jungian sense, that are not getting expressed or nourished or nurtured in my relationship with you. And so I might go looking for a person who reflects back that other aspect of me or that other archetype in me. And I get to express this other archetype, this like, maybe I'm very like earnest and intellectual with you, and I get to be a little bit more playful and risk-taking with another partner. And there's a sense that I'm getting to integrate all aspects of self. Not all with you, because it's okay. We're innately limited. Our bond is innately limited in some way. But when I when I have multiple partners, I feel different aspects of myself and I feel excited in different ways. And and sexual variety too is part of what people go looking for, to not be bored sexually, Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I'll speak to it now, but it kind of opens up a whole can of worms. I'm going to be blabbing for a while here.
Okay.
But the last thing you just said makes me think of this thing you hear the swingers say a lot is like, I love eating pizza, but after eating pizza for a while, a hamburger sure sounds good.
Oh. Yeah.
That's so funny. And it's kind of hard to argue with that,
But okay, then I almost want to play devil's advocate on that too, because like I actually think some people are just not oriented this way. They're not oriented towards non-monogamy. And there's a way that I want to say, like, you can have really deep, fulfilling, meaningful relationship in a monogamous bond too. Like, you and I have been together 10 years. Okay, but then 15 years in, you go through some big identity shift. And I sort of like, maybe I don't know about this new version of you, but I get to encounter you in a fresh way. And that is going to show up in our emotional intimacy, but also in our sexual intimacy.
Totally.
And then it's like something new happens in our sexual connection because you're actualizing.
Yes. And I think that's great.
That thing is real.
And there's fucking very, very few people that are doing that.
You think so?
Yeah, I think that's so
What are they
rare.
doing? They're saying, hold on, I'm going to go over here and have fun.
Well, I think 99 point some percent of people are either doing the like chasing the next new thing, or a slightly more mature version of it is like serial monogamy, or either doing that, or they're in a long-term relationship where they've just kind of like, they're just plodding through. It's just kind of like, all right, I'm married to this woman and I'm super entangled financially, domestically, kids, my identity, my whole community, my family, everything, and like I just have to be with her, and the love is gone, but and the capacity to do what you just described, I can't, because that requires this like courageous, vulnerable, intimate explore, and it requires like a death rebirth of the relationship, which requires a death rebirth of both people. Like, it's a fucking tall order what you just described. I just don't think most people will do that.
It is like what I try to do with people in couples therapy.
I think that's the fucking gold standard. I just think it's
like,
rare.
it's okay that version of your relationship is not working anymore.
Totally.
So like find a new part of yourself.
Yeah.
But then there's this question of like, then am I attracted to the new version of you?
Yeah.
And then there's a crossroads, and that's the like groundlessness or impermanence, which actually creates vitality for people. Like, oh, I might actually lose you if you continue to grow. Yeah. Which is terrifying on this like root chakra thing.
Totally.
Terrifying. Yeah. But also it's incredibly invigorating.
It's necessary. You can't try to like stop that.
In a long relationship, you got to be ready to free fall sometimes and not know.
And I'm saying 99% of most long relationships don't do that thing you're saying.
Don't do that free fall. They just stay.
They don't allow both partners to grow and evolve and transform and change, and they don't allow the relationship to have these cycles of death and rebirth. I think 99% of relationships do not do that. Because it's fucking, there's not that many individuals who are like psychologically mature enough to do that. Yeah. And relationships usually don't start with two individuals that are that mature. So it's just super fucking rare, I think.
Yeah. And I do think people get a taste for it in couples therapy sometimes.
Yeah. I think couples therapy at its best can,
it's not always possible,
can facilitate this. Yeah. But I even think couples therapy that does this is fairly rare. Yeah. People don't usually come into couples therapy until it's too late, and they're just like, this person, fuck this person, they're a horrible piece of shit, she's a fucking bitch. Ah. Oh, I think that this relationship is going, should we call a couples therapist now? I was like, no, you should have 2 years ago.
Yeah. I know John Gottman, his research says that people come to therapy on average 7 years too late.
Well, look, even I was too late. I thought it was only 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my answer to this question that I posed to you.
Yeah, let me hear it.
The idea of jealousy comes to mind. Jealousy seems like such a big, important part of romantic relationships and monogamy. Okay, so a big part of being in love is I love you, and mostly I love that you love me. That's not necessarily true, but that's a big part of it. It's true. And I think, and when you look at me and you're in love with me, you only love me. And you think I'm the best, most wonderful, beautiful, fantastic boy in the whole world. And that feels fucking great. And that's part of the mutual lover's gaze. So my beloved looks at me and she tells me, oh, I love you and you're the best. And like you feed this insecure ego in me that needs, we humans, we all have that insecure ego.
Yes.
And so you're feeding this to me. And it's a little bit like when I was 6 years old and I went to kindergarten and then went home and I was all scared. My mom came and gave that to me.
Yes.
Oh, baby, you're so wonderful. And it's like, oh God, and I needed that when I was 6 years old. But weirdly, we humans never grow out of that need. And I fast forward, now I'm 26 or 36 or 46. I still have that need, and I want my lover to give that to me, right? And so I fall in love, and she gives it to me. But after 4 years, she's not really giving it to me anymore, right? And then if she's like, hey, this guy Brad I'm working with asked me if I will go and have a glass of wine with him, and I can tell it's like, what? You think Brad is the greatest? You're not giving it to me right now? It hits this fucking, like, I can't survive if you don't think I'm the best boy in the world. And so I'm jealous of Brad, and so I want to kill you and Brad. Because it's that deep level of, it's like an existential threat. Because I need you to like only look at me, and I'm the apple of your eye, and no one else can be the apple of your eye.
And you think every human has that?
No, but I think the vast majority of them do, like more than 90%. And I think it's a normal, I don't think it's an unhealthy thing. I think it's a normal developmental thing. I think that maybe ultimately we humans need to transcend it, but we're a long ways from doing it. And I think most people, here's my very jaded and critical view of the human race, is that the vast majority of people have that, as I'm talking about. And then there's a few people who don't have it, but the reason they don't have it isn't because they've transcended, it's because they've been traumatized out of needing it. So it's sort of like
or feeling like they'll never get it, no matter how hard they try.
And I sort of feel like those people don't get jealous because they were like, somehow this thing I'm talking, they just have given up.
They know they're never going to be chosen.
Right.
Yeah. It's tender. I mean, like, it feels like a really early attachment need. Like this thing of like the parent, whichever parent or caregiver, like delighting in the baby. It's like, you're mine, and I want you as close to me as I can keep you.
Yep.
And then we want to recreate that with our intimate partner, right? Of like, that thing of like, it's something about being claimed. It feels like this fundamental need to belong somewhere, and that I can belong somewhere where even when I'm like broken or regressed or immature, I still belong with you. And it does seem very fundamental to our species.
Totally. Okay, but here's my problem with this and with the whole monogamy thing. Is so I have that need, which is legitimate. I'm not upset with myself for having it. And you're my romantic partner, so I need you to feed that need. Sure. And then vice versa, right? And so that's sort of our monogamous agreement, is I'll tell you you're the apple of my eye, you tell me you're the apple of my eye. Good. Now we're both secure. But the problem is, kind of as you were describing, is that we have all these other needs too. And if we get married, we're the apple of each other's eye, we sign it in paper, you're the apple of my eye forever, for eternity, and vice versa. Good. Take the contract, put it in our pocket. Okay, good. That need is now satisfied for the rest of my life. That's sort of like a big part of what the romantic commitment or marriage is. But then, and in Maslow's hierarchies, like that level sort of is now met. But now that allows us to move up to other levels. And like Brad at work evokes this other thing in you or whatever, and I'm like, no, you can't do that thing with Brad because we agreed we're only going to do this thing. That's the way relationships that's the monogamous normative thing right now, and the way most relationships work. And I just don't know if I believe that my need to have you tell me I'm the apple of your eye should like trump all other needs. I just don't know if it doesn't seem right.
I guess I wonder if there's almost a developmental, like, I don't know if this exists, but is there like a developmental process for intimate relationships, right? So like similar for the child. The child initially needs to feel like they are their mom's own whole world. They need to feel subsumed by the mom, combined with the mom, right? That's essential to create the bond. But then there's this natural developmental process where, and there's battles along the way, right? Where the mom opens her arms and the child is able to the child is able to differentiate and have their own life. And they're still intimately connected to the mother and always will be, but it's so different. It's not subsumed in that way. So could it be that there's an adulthood, there's a parallel kind of development in intimate relationships where maybe this thing is important right away, that's limerence. I mean, I'm just theorizing. I don't know.
Idea.
But there's an initial thing where it's like, I want to feel subsumed by you. I want to feel combined with you even, in order to meet that safety need. But then I start to feel, I know you're a secure attachment for me, and I don't feel that I need to cling so much. I can start to express myself fully with friends or with my children, right? Also, when I start to express myself fully with my children, if you're too insecure, you might even feel threatened by my bond with my children, no less another lover, right? But maybe this is a developmental process for adults.
Yep, totally.
And you increasingly can differentiate from your partner. You're still you still love each other. You're still in love, but there's not the need for that.
Yeah. And they maybe, if we, again, the Maslow's pyramid thing, and maybe they can still meet those lower needs, including you're my primary, but that doesn't have to be in conflict with these other different sexual exploration or erotic exploration or whatever else.
I think we're talking about the idealized case.
I love the idea of that. I don't think I've ever seen it working totally
in real life.
Yeah, at least when I'm thinking about the patients I've worked with. When I think about the patients, couples therapy, or even individual people who are talking about their various non-monogamous, polyamorous, whatever thing, I don't think I've ever seen this ideal. But I like the sound of it. I think we should try it.
Yeah. And then there's also the possibility that, I don't know. What I was gonna say is that, well, no, I think you do need that initial limerence, that initial enmeshment that's so delicious. I was gonna say, could you do it without that? Could you actually come together with a person and not, could you establish a secure bond with them without having that, enmeshment feeling? Yeah.
Because it does seem like if you come together with that in love, intoxicated enmeshment thing, then this developmental trajectory you're talking about,
it's a ripping apart.
It's gonna be fucking painful. You're not gonna be able to do it gracefully.
Yeah.
You're gonna do it with screaming, anger, hatred, pain.
Yeah. My husband and I have this metaphor that we've used for our relationship. And it came very early on, which is, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but we talked about our relationship as if we were sitting together in a screened-in porch. Mm-hmm. So it's I sort of imagine a love seat of this size, and he and I sitting in the screened-in porch. And so it's all covered with, we're outside, all covered with screens, which means you can watch the world go by. There's no problem. You can watch beautiful people go by. You can drool at them because they're so beautiful, or you think they're so smart, or whatever it is, and you watch them. And there's a screen door on both sides. I've got a screen door unlocked, unlatched. He's got a screen door unlocked and unlatched. And it's I am sitting on this couch with you because I want to be with you, but I'm watching the world and enjoying it, and there's fresh air coming in. And if I need to go out, I'm going to say to you, baby, I'll be right back. And then I go out and I come back in. If I come back in, and he can go out and come back in. And so that's a metaphor that's really important and useful for me around this, which is, and that was there very early on in our relationship,
And I love that metaphor. I think that's how it should be. And I think that humans should get there. I'm just skeptical.
Yeah.
When you get up and leave and go out the screen door, when I look at him sitting there in the screen porch,
it's painful.
Is he really going to be able to tolerate that? And then when you come back in, is he not going to hate you or resent you or gonna interrogate you? And can you resume back to the blissful screen porch thing?
Yeah, welcome. That's the impermanence of it.
Right.
Which actually keeps a relationship alive. And keeps it hot, too. It keeps the sexual polarity high. Yeah. if there's a little bit of like I think if there's a little bit of uncertainty, there's got to be enough safety, but then there's some uncertainty.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
But this thing, you're right. This thing of when I walk out and he's sitting there, or he walks out and I'm sitting here, it's wretched, right? It's painful. But maybe that's a kind of pain that we can learn to work with or get support from other people. In the poly community, do you know this term? It's called polyagony. Of that's just like it's just a bout of polyagony. You know, you've like, it's jealousy and it's discomfort and it's craving and wanting to be soothed. And I think it comes with the territory.
When I was dating a lot a while back, on some dating app, and I went out with this woman. Actually, I think on the dating app, she said that she's not in a poly relationship or something. And I went out, and as I was talking to her, eventually I at some point I had the realization of like, oh, she's only out on this date with me right now to mitigate polyagony, because her primary is out on a date, and she's like, oh fuck, I need to go on a date tonight. All right, dude, I'll meet you fucking tonight. And I'm like, she's just doing this with me just to like deal with polyagony.
And that's like, I really see that as a part of our Western culture, like this, like, and I mean, I'm not trying to set myself apart from it. I feel it too. You know, it's just like that we just want to get away from suffering and fix it, like layer something pleasurable on top of suffering. And I just think that creates more suffering, rather than just like, what if she just sat home and like had a good cry and watched a little Netflix with a glass of wine, and it's like, okay, I was sad. It was hard to watch you go. I missed you.
And when he came home, was like, hey, I'm suffering. Do you still love me?
And that's okay for her to ask. Do you still love me? And he's gonna say, of course I still. Hopefully, of course I still love you. You know, yeah. So just that trying to get away from suffering is, I think, sometimes the center of our greatest suffering.
Absolutely.
Yeah.